Alright, we're here for the first match. Unfortunately, well, you're on the play, which is nice. Revealing Jiggy. Taking a look at this opening hand. It has Caryatid, and if you follow the old rules of Nibtalate, if it has Caryatid, keep it, right? Obviously, we are relying upon drawing their land. The rest of the hand's kind of clunky. Chain of the Rocks currently has no targets, so we're solely keeping this hand on the back of Caryatid. Opponent plays Otawara and passes. We play Caryatid. Swamp being a little bit awkward with drawing Lotus there. Looks like we might be up against blue-white. We draw the awkward tap land. Opponent Azorius Charms. Sets up their Field of Ruin. We cast Slaughter Games. Opponent takes the opportunity to cycle Shark Typhoon. So, realistically, you can name a couple things here. You can name something like the Wandering Emperor. You could name Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. You could also name Shark Typhoon, potentially. Lesser things you could name like counterspells and stuff, but pretty much you want to strip them of their main win con. And that obviously being Teferi, which would bury us. So, we strip our opponent of their Teferi. Their deck is a lot of counterspells. 2 Jawara Disruption, a Censor, 4 Jawara Disruption, a Censor, a Saw It Coming, 2 Void Shatter, Memory Deluge, 4 Verdict, 3 Wandering Emperor, plus the 3 copies of Teferi that we just stripped out, plus they have 3 copies of Shark Typhoon. So, opponent really counterspell heavy. Not that much in early interaction. They have 4 Azorius Charms, 3 of Otherworldly Light. So this is a deck that could certainly get run over by fast aggro, but unfortunately we're playing a slow, clunky mid-range deck, so I wonder how this is going to go. Opponent goes ahead and Field of Ruins us. Let's get a red source, which is fine. Allows us to potentially cast Fable here, which they're just going to promptly Dovin's Veto. We at least could play around. Opponent continues to try to aggressively go after us. A Shark Typhoon. Chain of the Rocks, kill the stupid thing, because why not? Put Gigantha in our hand. Opponent plays out that. Opponent plays Memory Deluge. And Supreme Verdict's away our thing, making us even further. And at this point, I mean, potentially we could try to win through, all their stuff, but we need to draw 2 lands to cast basically anything in our hand except Leyline Binding and Gigantha. And our opponent has 7 cards in hand, plus a Memory Deluge to flash back. So, if you like beating your head against a wall, you could keep playing this game. But, generally speaking, your opponent's probably going to answer this in a reasonable time and kill you. So, we could have kept playing this game, but a little bit of frustration and concession here. As our opponent with double Field of Ruin kind of messing with our mana. Supreme Verdict awaiting our Caryatid. Anyways, on to game number 2. Alright, back for game number 2. Taking a look at sideboarding. Obviously, board out all our copies, Chain of the Rocks, board out one of our sweepers. Possibly should have boarded in Lavinia, but that really doesn't. It's just another early threat potentially. Also, boarded out Selfless Glyph Weaver. We brought in Reckoner Bankbusters. We brought in Dovin's Veto and Disdainful Stroke. So. We're on the play again, which is nice. Revealing Gigantha. We have a slow, clunky hand, but our deck is slow and clunky, so not going to really win. Trying to mulligan aggressively. Just going to name Teferi. Once again, kind of the card we care about. We play Fable. This runs directly into a Censor. Possibly should have played off curve, but then, the opponent misses land drops. Good for us, but Greedy Mana Base, can't really cast that. They go after that, so we don't have a red source. We draw the red source. We're able to cast Omnath. Opponent, once again, going after our mana. More power to them, I guess. I mean, at least they're consistent with their irrigated farmland thing. Get in there. Do we choose to what? Cast Elishnorn here? Somehow this resolves, which I find bizarre, but opponent goes for Supreme Verdict. So we just cast the Scarab God. And our opponent chooses to concede here, which I find interesting. But once again, we did note when we slaughter games them that they did not have a ton of creature removal in their deck. They had like the 3 or 4 copies of Azorius Charm, and they had copies of March of Otherworldly Light. Start bringing these guys back from the graveyard. Yep, I could see why my opponent would concede, and they might even have boarded out some Supreme Verdicts just to load up on counter spells. But clearly there, they didn't have a Void Shatter or something, and Scarab got resolved, so they died. I guess like they could have had Void Shatter or Saw It Coming, but they only had 2 mana open, so once again we were kind of playing around Jawari Disruption and Censor there. So on to game number 3. Alright, back for game number 3. Unfortunately, we're going to be on the draw against the heavy Censor Jawari Disruption deck. This hand is nothing special, I mean, but we have all of our colors of mana. We have 5 land drops. We can cast Fable and Marebreaker into Hostage Taker. So, I mean, it's a hand. Disdainful Stroke would be decent. The problem with cards like Disdainful Stroke, especially when your opponent's playing so many counter spells, is it really is only good at countering their threats, and it's like really telegraphed that we're playing nothing, and the opponent just kind of cycles a Shark Typhoon, so they kind of get to play this weird kind of flash style control game. Another thing we also noticed is they had I believe they had 4 copies of Castle Ardenvale, which is just absolutely insane. They get to flash in another Shark. Once again, playing around our awkward counter spells. That's for 3. Now, keeping in mind, we've boarded out most of our spot removal, so trying to get this Fable the Marebreaker to resolve, which they Dovin's Veto. Clearly, they know we're playing a counter spell at this point, so they're not going to do something like Slamma Teferi or something without some type of counter backup. Just continue to do the thing. We go ahead and cast Hostage Taker here, which they just take the opportunity to Memory Deluge, which we have to let resolve. We can't really fight over that. We just Hostage Taker to kill one of their creatures. They fake out like they're going to tap something. They attack. No reason not to, really. They're winning this race quite handily. We play another land, attack them down to 18. They activate, or they cast on their Memory Deluge. And they're just literally kind of winning on all fronts here. Now that said, their hand could be a bunch of bricks, or like planeswalkers and stuff that they don't want to commit to the board. But we have to start committing threats at some point. We attack. They take it. We try to put Reckoner Bankbuster. They have another Dovin's Veto. So, opponent goes after our lands. We're able to get another black source. Field of Ruin isn't quite as good against the Fabled Passage mana-based deck, although it is severely limiting how many like one-shot things we'll get out of Omnath. Go ahead and cast Omnath here. They Void Shatter it. Stop attacking, which may have been incorrect. I mean, we're not winning this race regardless, because if they want to turtle up, they just can with Castle Ardenvale. And they just continue to beat down. They just continue to hold back. They make their flashback Member Deluge here. Recycle, find another. Okay. They avoid Shatter that. Kind of hoping to run them out of counter spells here. Opponent makes another token. At this point they can start chipping in for 2, so we're on basically a 3-turn clock here. Start trying to cast Bring to Lights. Well, lets it resolve. We try to get Valky. They hit it with a Summary Dismissal. We try to hit it with a Disdainful Stroke. They have Narset's Reversal in the Summary Dismissal, and we know they still have a Summary Dismissal in hand. So this is looking really bad for the home team, as their deck is a bunch of very clunky counterspells, but also happens to match up quite nicely against our very clunky deck. They have Teferi, that's good enough. We're facing down tremendous pressure just from the creatures, plus Teferi. Our biggest bullet out of the deck is gone with Valky. I mean, sure, we could go get Scarab God, but we have no creatures in our graveyard this time, so... and Teferi can tuck it, so... it's possible I should have gone for Slaughter Games on Teferi, but I think we were trailing far enough that I had to try to go for the Hail Mary, since they let Bring to Light resolve, and then they just, hit us with that. So, kind of the downside of this deck is playing against blue-white control or spirits, decks with counter spells, bunch of counter spells that match up quite nicely against what you're doing. Plus your answers don't really line up to what they're doing particularly well. The downside of decks like Niv to Late that are control decks or mid-range decks without many threats. So, on to game number 2. Match number 2. Alright, we're back for match number 2. We are on the play, which is nice. Revealing our companion. Clunky hand. But, I mean, we have 4 of our colors lined up plus a Sylvan Caryatid. So we'll try it. Opponent leads on Recruitment Officer, so most likely humans. Go get our green source. Still draw a tap land anyway. Opponent leads on Thalia, which makes things a bit awkward for us. We really didn't want to draw a Glyphweaver, but opponent attacks, we block, take 2. Opponent plays Recruitment Officer and Hopeful Initiate, which makes a good bit of a removal a lot more awkward, so we just play Omnath. Drawing a land, which is nice. Well, obviously we can't cast Leyline Binding because requires 3 mana at this point. They have Screeve. Now we have 1 creature holding back their entire thing at the moment. Could potentially have played the Scarab God here, but I choose to get Fable going because we kind of want to filter through some of our draws. Opponent plays Adeline. They could be forcing things through, I guess, kind of, sort of, with Screeve here. Pitching those two. We play out Elish Norn, which helps stabilize the board in theory, but we're really not getting ahead, and our opponent's just attacking with everything here, which I find interesting. We take the opportunity to trade off with Adeline and block Thalia. They do the thing here. They play another Adeline, which explains their weird attack. We draw Extinction Event here, which actually puts us in a really weird position. So, one of the downsides of the Omnath deck is the severe lack of threats in the deck. You have 4 copies of Omnath. You have Elishnorn. You have, obviously, Valky here. But this actually represents, you know, the Omnath being dead, the Selfless Cliff Weaver gone. This actually represents a good amount of the threats in your deck. But we choose to attack here. Our opponent blocks the thing. So our opponent's odd, even odd. So we're going to blow up our own Elishnorn, which unfortunately opens up the ability for our opponent to play Thalia's Lieutenant and have it matter. They play Hopeful Initiate. So once again, we're kind of in an awkward spot. Turn after casting a sweeper. We play Omnath. We do Omnath things. Play the Scarab God. And opponent plays Ossification going after Scarab God. We probably should have just Leyline Binding this here, because if I recall correctly, with the way this works, if our opponent had enters the battlefield, exile target creature, planeswalker, and opponent controls until Ossification leaves the battlefield. Enters the battlefield, exile target non-permanent opponent controls until Leyline Binding. If our opponent actually, with the 3 mana up, had blown up this Leyline Binding, we never even would have gotten back the Scarab God for a split second, let alone had a chance to activate it to bring back one of their Adelines. Then we just kind of have this weird dance game. Go ahead and do that. We play Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, choosing to flip over some cards. We easily could have exiled the Hopeful Initiate potentially. Opponent blows up their thing, and they exile our Planeswalker, which leaves us with the Scarab God, so I guess I'm fine with that for now. We Scarab God, bring back Dauntless Bodyguard. Just kind of taking over the game. Bottom both. Probably should have held on to Leyline and Binding, honestly. Not that we really want to get whatchamacallit back, but I guess with a Hopeful Initiate, we just wanted to find something that wasn't enchantment based. They find their 3rd Adeline of the game. Ossification goes after the Scarab God. Now we're just kind of left staring at each other right now for a bit. And keeping in mind, both of our sweepers are already gone. So we go ahead and cast Bring to Light, and have to cast it for 6. We go and get Hostage Taker, which, like I said, our options were kind of middling at this point. And the opponent concedes just because this kind of threatens to break the board stalemate. I could even get their Thalia's Lieutenant and cast it, so which would pump, you know, all of our various humans. So, you know, definitely seeing some of the strengths and the weaknesses of this deck. The one thing with like Niv, so Niv, now Niv obviously makes the deck worse, quote unquote, but Niv was still a 6/6 flyer. So, be that as it may, you know, you still could threaten to win the game pretty quickly. You know, if your opponent, you get in these kind of ground stalls, it can be kind of hard to break through. All right, we're back for game number 2. Taking a look at sideboarding. So the way this sideboard was constructed, there wasn't a ton really to bring in. We had the 2 copies of Rending Volley for the Slaughter games, and the Kiora, just because the Kiora might be a little bit hard to defend. Keep the Gigantha, obviously. I don't know how many times during this league I forgot about Gigantha. Like, that could have made a huge difference in the game we were just playing as well. This hand's kind of awkward. 4 drops and 5 drops. I think against humans you got to mulligan a little bit more aggressively. This hand, turn 2 Caryatid, Fable Mirror Breakers all the way around, but I still think it's a hand you keep. Opponent goes Hopeful Initiate. We go land. There you go, Thalia. We go Sylvan Caryatid. There you go, Redain. Well, that's a problem. And obviously we get to cast Fable here, but we have to tap our Caryatid. Our opponent goes Brutal Cathar. Gets to hit us for 6. Just kind of doing mono white humans curve out things. Potentially even hold up something like Brave the Elements. We draw Bring the Light, but Bring the Light does nothing. We pass, and then concede the game. So, while we're not dead, and we could potentially like Leyline Binding this Redain, cast Bring the Light. But Thalia taxes both ends of that, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're just kind of locked out by the tax plus pressure plan. So, and Brutal Cathar just getting our Fable out of the way. So unfortunate to get steamrolled there, game 2. Can we come back in game number 3? All right, back for game number 3. We're on the play, obviously. Once again, awkward hand, early Chain of the Rocks, double Bring the Light. Can't remember if I guess I end up keeping this hand just because we have the early removal spell. Opponent has no 1-drop because they did mulligan, unfortunately. There you go, turn 1 Thalia's Lieutenant. Take the opportunity to chain that while we can. Opponent goes Wedding Announcement. We cast Hostage Taker, just to keep their pressure off the board, get a body on the battlefield. Recruitment Officer, Adeline. It's possible we should have held up Hostage Taker for one more turn, but we go ahead and cast Bring to Light, grabbing Extinction Event to wipe their board. They have Luminarch Aspirant into power up their Mutavault. Opponent swings in here. Go ahead and play Selfless Glyph Weaver. Just to have another blocker. They have Brutal Cathar, which is annoying. They fire in here with their Mutavault, nothing else. Our 2/3 kind of keeping us from getting really beat down. We go ahead and cast Bring the Light, presumably for Omnath here. No for Valky. Settling that. They ossify our thing. So they swing in here. Attack with everything. We go ahead and double block their 4/4. This backside of Wedding Announcement being surprisingly relevant. Play Brutal Cathar, killing one of their tokens. So even if they kill it, they get nothing back. They pump their team yet again. Swing again. We double block the Mutavault. We choose to kill the Brutal Cathar because it does once again threaten to take over the game. We go to 1. Find to Bring the Light. Cast Omnath. Omnath finds Fable. Fable is another blocker, plus it's a dig in the next turn. Opponent casts a Thalia. Thalia's Lieutenant grows. Pass the turn. We draw. Triumph that we ditch. Find a Caryatid. It's a blocker, so we play it. And our opponent concedes. So, still possibly anybody's game at this point. Although this was getting ready to flip, so still not the most impressive showing for this deck, I will say. I honestly feel like Nib might be better, but on to match number 3. All right, on to match number 3. Our opening hand, we've got a couple tap lands, Stomping Ground if we really need to play something untapped. Fable, Chain of the Rocks, Leyline Binding, plus Omnath. Seems like a pretty reasonable hand. Opponent leads on Hive of the Eye, Tyrant passes. We draw another Fable. Opponent plays Mutavault, plays Misery's Shadow. Might have been a premature use of Chain of the Rocks here, but I just wanted to get their threat off the battlefield. Keep our life total high. Parity going into the mid-game. They have Liliana, which is surprisingly annoying for our deck to deal with, though we do fortunately have the Leyline Binding present. Go ahead and Leyline Binding there, Liliana. Kind of hoping they don't have a Sheoldred here. Into their own Fable. Okay. We play our Fable. Play a tap land and pass. Opponent pitches a Mutavault. Stomps our token. Gets in here. Plays Bone Crusher Giant. So Rakdos doing Rakdos things. Go ahead and catch Omnath. Casting Hostage Taker to kill their dude. Could have tried for Bone Crusher Giant, but then if we get a removal spell, then they just kind of get to blow us out. Instead, they rip Liliana. Don't swing in. We need to find an answer to this. Bone Crusher Giant pretty badly. We cycle our Triome. Find another land. So, felt like we should have been ahead, but our opponent kept drawing gas and we kept drawing lands, so. Kills our Omnath. Forces us to discard a card, which just a land for us at this point. Take 4 here. Needed to rip something good. Cycle into another land, try to attack Liliana, they trade with Mutavault, and they're just so far ahead at this point that it's kind of almost a joke. Hive of the Eye, Tyrant starts to fire up, and Rakdos turns the corner, man. Rakdos turns the corner. And then we draw Escape to the Wilds, but we're just so far dead that it's kind of too little too late. Alright, taking a look at how we sideboarded. We boarded in the 2 Bank Busters and the 2 Pithing Needles. The thought process was that Liliana was just such a backbreaker last game. You know, we really only had 4 copies of Leyline Binding to deal with her. So I'm not sure how we sideboard was correct, because I definitely probably still wanted Hostage Taker in the deck. As I mentioned before, this deck is very light on threats. So, once again, I do think we forgot about Gigantha last game, though. I don't know how many times I forgot about this poor elemental elk throughout this league. Just how many times I forgot that card. Hand's a bit risky. 2-lander. We do have a bunch of our high impact cards, but you know, we could just get run out of the game here if we stumble. Play out our tap land. Opponent thought seizes us, takes Bring to Light. We draw Caryatid, which is not bad as long as they don't have Liliana. They have Blood Tithe Harvester, which is annoying, but you know, fine. Opponent has Liliana again, forces us to sacrifice. Like I said, Liliana has been surprisingly effective in this matchup. And they obviously have Sheoldred. We pitch Valky just because it doesn't do anything here. Draw a tap land. And then opponent draws Bankbuster. Activates Bankbuster. Activates Liliana. We draw a card. We choose to pitch what Scarab got here. Which may or may not have been correct, but we're so far on the back foot right now anyway. Leyline Binding's awkward because of It was possible that we were just supposed to Leyline Binding this turn. I played Omnath, kind of hoping to rip a land. So it was either Leyline Binding Shieldred or Leyline Binding Liliana. Liliana, obviously being at 3, would have forced us to Edict this. We could have activated Bankbuster to chump block for a turn if they don't draw a Fatal Push or something that doesn't go for the throat. So it was a bit of a gamble play. The safe play would have just been to Leyline Binding the Shieldred and hope they didn't either have another one or some other high impact play. So, not sure that Chaining to the Rocks, this Blood Tithe Harvester, when we did, was the correct move either. But once again, I wanted to try to keep the pressure down to get to the mid game where I feel like we should be advantaged. But just these awkward draws. Talk about notes here in a couple seconds. So if you look at Omnath to Light. Now, the plus side of this deck, right, you get to play Leyline Binding, you get to play Omnath, you get to play Fable the Mirror Breaker, you get to play Chain of the Rocks, theoretically a better mana base, but number one, I forgot Gigantha, I don't know how many times this league that played 2 other matches. One was against some type of Jun pile that we beat, and then another match that we lost that I don't remember what it was. But remembering Gigantha certainly would have helped. Don't get me wrong there. But the problem with this deck is it's great. This deck is great at stalemating, but very, very bad at closing in those stalemates. At least the small sample size we saw. 4 copies of Omnath, obviously, great card. Hostage Taker, great card. Glyph Weaver, great card. You know, the mana base, it is what it is. It's a 5-color mana base with Fabled Passages. You're going to have some clunkers. That's going to happen. Caryatid, still a great card. You know, all the bullets are fine. The one of Kiora feels a little weird. I understand the theory behind it. You want another mana accelerator. Some of them are running like Briefcase and such as like another 2-drop, Courier's Briefcase. So you want another accelerator that could also, you know, allow you to draw cards off of your Omnaths and your your Omnaths, your Elesh Norns, etc. But I think there's 2 problems with this deck. First off, there aren't a lot of threats outside of Omnath. You have your one of Tybalt, which very powerful card, don't get me wrong. Scarab God, you have Elesh Norn, and then you have Hostage Taker. You don't have any utility lands because you're playing the 5-color mana base, so you're playing 31 mana sources, 32 mana sources, which is almost as many as mono green, without as many powerful payoffs. In some ways, this deck just feels like a worse version of what the Fires decks are trying to do, and a worse version of Nimizet, which we'll get to in a minute. The sideboard, I completely understand where the sideboard's trying to come from. Like, you're trying to do this like weird split where like you're playing all these utility cards, which Pithing Needle's a good catch-all, but a little bit awkward sometimes. Running Volley, very good against a certain subset of decks, mostly the aggressive decks. You have Rest in Peace for any type of graveyard nonsense. You have the counter spells to theoretically fight over big idiots. You have Rankner Bankbuster for the grinding games. You have Lavinia for, you know, decks like Lotus Field and such. So you have a very good set of hate cards, but very little in the way of like a coherent game plan. Like, you can't bring to light for any of these cards other than Lavinia. Bankbuster is fine, but you don't have a lot of things to crew it. You have, what, Omnath, Fable, Scarab God, Elesh Norn, Hostage Taker, and whatever you can steal from your opponent with Valky. Maybe it was just this list, maybe it was just a subset of games we played, but I really wonder if Niv isn't just better. Obviously, the downside with Niv is you don't get to play Fable, you don't get to play Leyline Binding, and you don't get to play Chain of the Rocks. Oh, wait. We get to play Leyline Binding, Fable. We have an 80 card pile. Wandering Mind, cute card. It's a 2/1 flyer, so you have flying pressure, which is nice. You also have the ability to look at the top 6 cards, take a non-creature, non-land. Helps with card selection. Helps with kind of bridge the gap with Fable. You still get to play 3 copies of Omnath. You still get to play additional copies of Sweepers, in addition to Glyph Weaver. You know how you have all these random one-ofs, Growth Spiral, along with Sylvan Caryatid as a ramp spell. And obviously all this is facilitated by playing Urion. Now, I have never been the hugest Niv Mizzet Reborn or Bring to Light aficionado. Now, I've always had a soft spot for the deck. I had a soft spot for it when it was pseudo-playable in the modern format. I have a soft spot for it in this format. So maybe I'm just a little partial to Niv Mizzet personally. And, am I fine with my Niv kind of bricking every now and again? Sure. Do I know which version is better? Currently, people think the Omnath version or the Omnath Light 60 card version is better. Maybe if I'd remember Gigantha, we'd have a slightly better winning percentage in that league. But, yeah, I'm kind of liking the 6/6 flyer that can close the game. Ossification's annoying. Things that exile your threats are very annoying to this deck just because you don't have that many. But the same thing's true for the Omnath Light deck. So we might have to do a little bit of kind of not like a competition going, but maybe play a couple leagues with both decks and see which one actually feels better. Obviously 5-color Niv Light kind of went away, and then Omnath pops up at the Pro Tour, does well. I mean, I can certainly understand the power of the deck, but we certainly struggled to close out games, which feels not great for a deck that is competing in the same spots as things like, Fires of Invention decks, Mono Green, those kind of things. Now, I certainly did get destroyed by one while playing Mono Green, but, that's a whole other thing. But, anyways, if you like these kind of videos, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, especially if you like any type of Pioneer content. We're currently working on kind of rounding out our Mono Green content. Trying to get a sideboard guide, well, not sideboard, but matchup guide deck together for that, hopefully soon, etc. And then we'll be moving on to other decks like Ruled Rakdos. And then in the meantime, we're playing some of the lesser played decks to kind of round out with the deck guides that went with them, kind of get an idea of how they function and such, and starting to work down the list there. So if you like all things Pioneer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and hope to see you for the next video.